plus export restrictions on some chemicals and scrap steel. Last week, the EU threatened around $100 billion worth of counter-tariffs on a raft of American products from Boeing aircraft to bourbon whiskey.
First of all, we stand together. I mean, we're 27 countries, and it's very important that we stand together because our market is bigger than the US market. We are many consumers here on this side.
In a plot twist straight out of a Hollywood drama, Trump's tariffs backfired, and now Europe has turned its back on the US to rewrite the rules of global trade. From peanut butter wars to Boeing's shocking $43 billion fallout, this isn't just politics, it's an economic earthquake. And wait until you hear who's cashing in on America's blunder. Quick favor before we move on. If you appreciate this content, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Believe it or not, more than 92% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. It's free and only takes a second, but it means the world to us. So, did you subscribe already? Great, thank you so much for your support. Now back to the video.
US view of Europe still seems far from friendly.
The European Union is in many ways nastier than China, okay? And we've just started with them. Oh, they'll come down a lot. You will.
But it's not business as usual. Washington plans to hike tariffs on most EU goods to 20% come July. And despite EU efforts to strike a deal and avoid the rise,
imagine picking a fight and accidentally punching yourself in the face. That sums up Trump's tariff strategy as neatly as anything. Back in 2018, Trump announced that European steel and aluminum imports were a threat to national security, which, let's be honest, sounds like the setup to a bad action movie. The logic was that slapping tariffs on these goods would protect American metal industries, giving them the edge they allegedly needed. Did it work? Well, let's just say the fireworks started almost immediately. But not the celebratory kind. The EU didn't waste a second firing back. They hit the US where it hurt, by targeting goods that were practically dripping with American identity. Harley-Davidson motorcycles, Levi's jeans, peanut butter. It was as if Europe decided to rewrite the great American novel, one tariff at a time. And they did this with purpose. They wanted their retaliation to be both effective and symbolic. Skippy and Jif suddenly found themselves turned into weapons of economic retaliation. Europeans weren't just debating creamy versus crunchy anymore. They were asking if peanut butter was worth paying more for, thanks to that added tariff burden. And Harley-Davidson, one of the most recognizable American brands in history, had to start shifting production out of the United States just to avoid EU tariffs. Talk about irony. Here's where things start to sound like a tragic comedy. Research at the time showed that these tariffs cost more American jobs than they were supposed to save. One study pointed out that for every job protected in steel manufacturing, upstream industries, think car makers, construction firms, and heavy equipment manufacturers, were losing theirs because their material costs skyrocketed. Exports from the US to Europe took a nosedive. American whiskey exports, a small but telling example, tumbled by more than 30% in just the first few months after the EU announced its retaliatory tariffs. Even the European lobster market found cheaper alternatives elsewhere, leaving American sellers clawing for sales. It became clear that Trump's trade tantrum wasn't just tossing a wrench into global trade, it was hitting US exporters harder than anyone seemed to realize. By this point, the battle wasn't just about the goods themselves. These tariffs started rippling through industries like an economic earthquake. American soybean farmers found themselves as unlikely casualties, as EU buyers began sourcing soy from Brazil instead. Manufacturers relying on steel and aluminum started lobbying for exemptions just to keep their heads above water. Even niche products like playing cards got caught in this awkward mess. Yes, playing cards. And also how quickly allies can start looking elsewhere. Because here's the kicker. While Trump was busy building barricades around American markets, the EU started asking itself a critical question. Do we really need the US? The answer didn't come right away, but it started brewing. But in doing so, it began exploring new partnerships and possibilities. The tariffs didn't just ruffle feathers, they sent tremors through every layer of transatlantic trade. Which brings us to one of the loudest, most expensive echoes of those tariff fights. Boeing. Europe didn't stop with Levi's jeans and peanut butter. It turned its attention to America's pride and joy aviation industry. And let's just say, the turbulence wasn't limited to airplane cabins. Would you believe the fallout from all this could put a $43 billion order on the line? If Trump's tariffs were a punch, the aviation sector was about to become the black eye. What's more expensive than a canceled wedding? A canceled $43 billion Boeing order. And that's exactly the price tag Europe slapped on the table as their next move in this trade war drama. Forget peanut butter and blue jeans. This was about one of America's most prized industries, aviation. Boeing isn't just any company. It's a symbol of American industrial power. So, when the EU threatened to cancel its massive order, it was like lobbing a grenade into the middle of an already shaky economic battlefield. At first glance, you might think Europe was just playing hardball. But this wasn't some random move. It was a calculated, strategic escalation. Think about it. Targeting Boeing meant hitting an industry that props up tens of thousands of American jobs. We're talking factory workers, engineers, suppliers, logistics teams. Every cog in the machine was vulnerable. The EU didn't just want to make noise, they wanted to deliver a message. That message? Your tariffs hurt, but this hurts more. The potential fallout of such a move was massive. Boeing losing a $43 billion order wouldn't just be a dent, it would be a full-blown crater. Thousands of employees relying on this deal would have faced the terrifying reality of layoffs. Suppliers, companies providing everything from aircraft materials to nuts and bolts, would have struggled overnight to stay afloat. The ripple effects would have hit small towns and entire communities built around Boeing's operations. And let's not forget about the many ancillary industries connected to aviation, like maintenance, repairs, and training services. If you think about it, the EU's threat wasn't just about planes, it was about destabilizing an entire ecosystem. For Boeing, this wasn't just a financial nightmare, it was a PR nightmare too. Losing such a high-profile client could have chipped away at its global reputation. And that's something money can't easily fix. America likes to boast that companies like Boeing are leaders in innovation and reliability. But if Europe had abandoned ship, that leader title could have started slipping. And who might have stepped in to fill the void? Enter companies like Airbus, Boeing's longtime European rival. You can almost picture Airbus executives quietly pouring champagne as they watch the tariffs unfold. Europe's move wasn't just about getting even, it doubled as a massive favor to its homegrown aviation industry. Airbus wouldn't just pick up the slack. American aerospace manufacturing is one of the few fields where the US still dominates globally. But domination only works if your clients stick around. If Europe had canceled, other international buyers might have started rethinking their loyalty too. That's how fragile the situation was. All it took was one big crack to weaken the foundation. But here's the thing. This isn't just about airliners and GDP stats. The EU's strategy was as much a power move as it was a practical one. By threatening to take their business elsewhere, Europe showed they weren't afraid to pull the rug out from under American industries. And this went far beyond Boeing. The very idea of canceling the order spotlighted how dependent certain sectors of the US economy were on international goodwill. In hindsight, the tariffs weren't just about steel and aluminum anymore. They were about the foundation of America's economy and how easily it could wobble under pressure. It's also important to note how heavily Boeing leaned on deals like these to stay ahead of the competition. Losing $43 billion doesn't just impact the present, it impacts the future. Research and development budgets shrink. Expansion plans get shelved. Stock prices fall. For a company like Boeing, which was already juggling other challenges like technical issues with their aircraft at the time, remember the 737 MAX debacle? This kind of blow could have been catastrophic. And what's worse, losing a big order like this could have made their rivals look like a safer bet. After all, if Boeing loses favor with one of its most significant clients, what does that say to everybody else? So why did Europe aim so high? Simple. They wanted to show America exactly how intertwined their economies were, and how much power the EU held in that balance. This wasn't just a tantrum. This was economic diplomacy 101, served cold and calculated. What makes this even more fascinating is how it opened the door for other players to step into the aviation industry. If Europe moved to Airbus, could new partnerships emerge with companies from Canada, China, or Brazil? The EU wasn't just retaliating. They were sketching the outlines of a world where America's dominance in key markets wasn't a given. Trade wars have consequences, and one by one, they started adding up. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. The Boeing crisis wasn't just a wake-up call for aviation. It was part of a much bigger picture. Europe hadn't just retaliated in this trade war. It had started rethinking its alliances entirely. And the more the US doubled down on tariffs, the more the EU explored relationships beyond its transatlantic partner. Take Canada, for example. What was once just another trading partner suddenly became a lifeline. While Boeing dealt with its headache, European leaders were busy drafting a playbook for their next chapter. Keep watching, because what comes next involves one country, a few tariffs, and an unexpected alliance that changed everything. Who knew maple syrup diplomacy could reshape global trade, right? But that's exactly what happened as Europe found its unexpected knight in flannel armor, Canada. While Trump's tariffs had the EU scrambling, Canada came strolling in with the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, to save the day. This deal, which kicked in provisionally back in 2017, didn't just remove nearly all tariffs between the EU and Canada. It became a tool that reshaped Europe's entire trade strategy. Think of it as the trade agreement equivalent of a Swiss Army knife. Simple, sleek, and surprisingly powerful. When the US went full protectionist with its tariffs on steel, aluminum, and iconic goods, the EU didn't just sit around sulking. They scanned the horizon for new opportunities, and there stood Canada with an open market and open arms. Thanks to CETA, European businesses could now dodge Trump's tariffs completely by working through Canada. Instead of relying on American steel or aluminum, Canadian suppliers became Europe's go-to partners. And it wasn't just about metals. This agreement unlocked Canadian resources, markets, and opportunities that made it much easier for the EU to say, "Sorry, Uncle Sam, we've got other plans." Take energy, for example. Europe was already looking to reduce reliance on fossil fuels and diversify its energy supply. That's where Canada came in handy. The two sides began working closely on clean technologies, which turned into a bright spot in an otherwise tense trade environment. Europe and Canada even hosted events like the Clean Technology Summit, where millions of dollars poured into projects involving renewable energy, hydrogen energy, wind farms, solar power. Canada helped check all the EU's boxes for green innovation. And this wasn't just coincidence. It was completely aligned with the EU's ambitious Repower EU plan, which focuses on producing 20 million tons of renewable hydrogen by 2030. With those kinds of goals, having Canada as a partner wasn't just helpful, it was essential. What's wild is how this new relationship evolved. Canadian industries that most people didn't even think about, like clean energy, became lifelines for the EU. While Trump was busy building tariff walls, Europe was building a sustainable future with new friends. And the best part? CETA made this partnership almost seamless. Trade volumes predictably jumped, benefiting both sides. For Canada, this wasn't just about exporting maple syrup and hockey sticks. It was about becoming a serious player in global trade. For the EU, it was about proving there was life after American tariffs. And together, they made it clear that the US wasn't the only game in town. Now, to sweeten the deal, this partnership wasn't just limited to traditional industries. The EU and Canada also dabbled in the digital and tech arenas. With CETA paving the way, they collaborated on creating eco-friendly solutions, smart cities, and better digital infrastructure. This collaboration started producing an actual impact. But here's the thing. Not everyone noticed how big of a deal this was. Sure, headlines about Trump's trade wars dominated the conversation. But quietly, in the background, this maple syrup connection started shifting the power dynamics of global trade. Let's not overlook the symbolism here. Canada, America's northern neighbor, stepped up to help Europe bypass America. It was almost poetic, like wheels turning behind Trump's back while he wasn't paying attention.